TSU community, we thank you for allowing us to be here with you today. Of course, we have our panelists. We shall hear from them shortly. My name is Arkana Chiobori-Kwao. I am the former AU ambassador to the United States. I went to Washington in December of 2016 with a very open mind, a clean slate, for I was a practicing physician who was put in an awkward position of becoming an ambassador with no experience whatsoever, what diplomacy is all about. I think once upon a time I had a cousin from Zimbabwe who was an ambassador, but that was back in the 90s. And that was the extent of my understanding of diplomacy. With what I knew, I just didn't think diplomats did much. There were people who would take one problem and it would take them 5 years, if ever, to get it solved. Coming from healthcare, where we get immediate results, immediate satisfaction out of the work that we are doing, I didn't think I was going to last long in Washington, D.C. Out of respect for Madam Zuma, I did go to Washington. Out of respect for Madam Zuma, I did go to Washington. Okay, that's better. Out of respect for Madam Zuma, I went to Washington, but not really planning to stay because I didn't think I could handle it really. But as I stayed in Washington, D.C., something happened around month 4, 5, and 6. The apparent disrespect for the Africans. That's what really got me to decide that maybe I should just hang around a little bit longer and maybe be the voice for those who needed a voice, the 1.27 billion people on the continent. As I stayed along on my job, even on the continent, traveling in the US, I also became aware of one other situation, which was our lack of understanding of what was really going on in our Africa. Quite often, when I spoke here in the United States, in South America, in the Caribbean, and even on the continent, almost 100% of the time, the first question was, Ambassador, what about the corrupt African leaders? There's a lot of corruption. And I would say, yes, I agree, we do have corruption. But I would hope that you would ask me about even bigger corruptions. And at that point, I would share with them the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization that's allowing France to take over $500 billion out of Africa. And I said, if you're that concerned about the 50 billion, collectively studies say 50 billion comes out of Africa from corruption. Well, then let's talk about that, but let's not forget, one little bitty country is taking over $500 billion. And by the time they finish investing that money in their own stock market, they're realizing trillions of dollars in any given year. That's just one former colonizer. And yet, we're being asked to only talk about the 50 billion coming out of the continent. So I felt that there was a disconnect and a lack of really understanding. I felt that we were fighting this war from the wrong front. Removing an African leader and not dealing with the bigger corruptors was not going to give us the Africa that we wanted. So it was based on that, I felt that I needed to have a way of reorienting us and making sure that we understand the issues that are going on in Africa, these issues that affect not only Africans on the continent, but also Africans abroad. And by Africans, I mean all people of African descent. It was with that understanding that I did my first video. My first video was a way of trying to share with the diaspora that this is where we started. This is what has happened to us. This is how where we are today is dictated by what has been done to us. Because I also realized that quite often, while we may have understood about the Berlin Conference, there was a disconnect. Most saw it as a piece of history, but failed to make the connection that those decisions that were made during the Berlin Conference continue to affect us today, 135 years later. So that education was very important. And I felt that until we understand our Africa, until we understand ourselves the way we need to, we're going to be fighting in the wrong front. We're going to be staying in the wrong lane. Let me take, for example, the Berlin Conference. It was when the colonizers came together in 1884 to organize themselves so they could see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. They chopped us up into the tiny little economies that we are today. And those boundaries have persisted to this very day. Then one might say, well, how does that affect me? Have you ever wondered why, if you wanted to go from one part of Africa to the other, you have to fly into Europe first and then come back down? This is because of the Berlin Conference. The airspaces above the African countries were closed. Have you ever wondered why, for a continent with all the natural resources the world could ever need, we do not dictate the price of not even one? It's because the powers that be are coming to us as the tiny little countries. How does Malawi negotiate with China? How does Lesotho, with 1.5 million people, negotiate with China with 1.4 billion people? I often use an example of my poor husband being thrown into the same boxing ring with Mike Tyson. And my husband, when he collapses before he gets on the stage, the world then says, what's wrong with you, Dr. Kwabo? You can't fight Mike Tyson. The reality is, Africa is under siege. The colonizers who claim to have left Africa between 1957 and 1962, for the most part. On paper, they are out of Africa, but in reality, they never left Africa. You also have to understand that when they divided Africa up in 1884, they acquired those countries. Those countries became properties of the colonizer. They ruled those countries until we started having educated leaders coming up like the Kwame Nkrumahs, who went to school in Lincoln University and all that. They started demanding independence. We were given independence, and I'm going to put this in quotation marks. But this is a colonizer who has colonized you for over a century. Now suddenly they're giving you independence, but they're still very much in your country. How do you really, you're now a small country. France has colonized you, Britain has colonized you for over a century. And then you're supposed to go to the negotiating table with them and think that this is gonna be a fair conversation. You see, the independence said you're a sovereign nation. How does Togo, after getting her independence, negotiate with France the master? To the Togolese, France is still the master. To those from Central African Republic, Burkina Faso, France is still the master. There just was no parity there. So at every level, in spite of getting our independence, we're still defeated. But France, of course, for those of you who have listened to my videos, did something to this day continues to be quite deplorable. They forced the African countries to sign what they call the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. On one hand, you're getting your independence, but on the other hand, you must sign this document agreeing to continue to be colonized. Two countries refused to sign. That was Guinea and Mali. France went in took everything they thought they had brought to those two economies, poured concrete into the sewage pipes, completely devastating the two economies. That was done as a way of showing the other countries that if you dare refuse to sign this document, this is the fate that awaited you. So the rest of them went on and signed. From 1962 up until as late as Libya, there are many African countries that decided that they were going to pull back and stop sending their money to France. And each time, there was a coup in those countries, and those leaders were assassinated. For those of you who have not listened to my videos, the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization basically said, you will deposit 85% of your bank reserves with the Central Bank of France under the control of the French Minister of Finance. France then takes all your deposits and invests them into the French stock market under the French name, and the countries may or may not know the returns. If you wish to access some of the money that you have deposited, you have to submit your country's financial statements. And if approved, you get the loan, a maximum of 20% of your deposits from the previous year as a loan at commercial interest rates. So on one hand, you've been depositing large amounts of money with France, and now you owe France for borrowing your own money. And the world has no problem with that. That has been going on since the late 50s. 2019, fast forward, the African countries are still depositing their money with France. Today, France is taking out of Africa over $500 billion every year from poor countries that need the money. And yet France has the audacity to look at African countries and say, why are you guys poor? Why aren't you able to create jobs for your young people? Why are your young people crossing the Mediterranean and dying? Why do you not have good health care, good educational systems? It's like setting my house on fire, and then you come back and you ask me why I'm homeless. We have taken $500 billion out of Africa. Do you know how many schools, how many hospitals, how many jobs we could create with $500 billion? To put things in perspective for you, the latest figures as we are going through the African Continental Free Trade Area are saying Africa needs $100 billion a year for the next 10 years in order to completely build the infrastructure that Africa needs. Pause for a second. Africa needs $100 billion a year for 10 years in order to build the entire infrastructure needed for the entire continent. That's only 2 years of takings from Africa by France. Are you with me? Are you getting my point when I say we must understand our issues and we must fight from the right front? We could solve this if France got out of Africa. We could solve this if we spoke with one voice and sent a clear message to France that enough is enough. So that was just finance. The pact also continues and said all your minerals discovered and yet to be discovered, all your oil discovered and yet to be discovered belongs to France. And that French companies have the first right of refusal. All the major contracts, public and private French companies have the first right of refusal. Your local companies will get whatever France does not want. They also said your military shall be trained by France. You can only order military equipment from France, and that France will have military presence in your country, and that France can invade you without notice should they feel their interests are being violated. And a violation would include a president who says, I can no longer continue to give you my deposits. That's a violation, and it calls for military intervention. And in most cases, of the 67 coups that have occurred in Africa, in 26 countries, 16 countries were former French colonies. Now, in addition to some documented, a lot of those coups, France was behind it, and they were committed by the French legionnaires. And of course, the others were committed by just rich kids who, when they found out that a natural resource had been discovered in a country, they created a coup in order to throw the country into a civil war. And while the country is going through a civil war, they're siphoning that natural resource. Case in point that I always share is a situation that occurred about 25 years ago. A bunch of white kids were having fun in Cape Town. And at that time, Equatorial Guinea had just discovered oil. They wanted it. So they came up with a plan that they were going to appoint one diaspora from Equatorial Guinea who lived in the islands. And they were going to throw the country into a civil war. So the plan was to pick up one plane left the Caribbean, which was carrying the would-be president, and another plane was leaving from South Africa, Cape Town. And they made one mistake. They bought some of the ammunition in South Africa, and the rest was going to be picked up in Zimbabwe. President Mugabe smelt a rat. He wondered why these young people needed such powerful ammunition to go hunt in Equatorial Guinea. In researching further, he found out that there was a coup in the making. He allowed them to land in Harare. They loaded up the plane with their equipment. And just before takeoff, they were all arrested. One of the guys involved in that was the son of the former Prime Minister of Britain, Margaret Thatcher. So it is that they were all arrested. Prime Minister Thatcher had to fly to Zimbabwe and paid handsomely for her son. The rest spent years in Zimbabwean prisons. The last ones to come out was about 5, 6, 7 years ago. Had they succeeded, it would have been, oh, there they go, the Africans again. Another coup. I can honestly tell you not a single coup that took place in Africa was of African origin. It might have been someone who looks like us. Look at Sankara, for example. But others were behind those coups. None, and I repeat, none of the coups that have taken place in Africa were of African origin. That is our reality. That is what I set out to educate us. To say what we have been told, a lot of them are lies. That until we begin to understand our Africa for what it is, until we begin to understand ourselves, the lies even go on even to African Americans and continental Africans. Yes. The unnecessary fights. We're being told we're different. Yes. My brothers and sisters, if I took all of you to Africa right now, you just blend. Nobody would know that you're African American. If you and my husband are crossing the street, they see two black men. They don't see an African American. They don't see a continental African. So those who wish to divide us, the rule of divide and conquer is alive and well among us. The legacy of slavery is alive and well. We live in this wonderful country of the United States. If there's one place in the world that you are seeing the examples on a daily basis around us, it is this country. When you ask for the voices of the Chinese diaspora loud and clear, they stick together like super glue when it comes to their issues. The Irish diaspora, the German Americans, the Italian Americans, the Indian diaspora, the Mexican Americans, they all come together and support each other. Yes. But when you ask for the voices of the black people, the African Americans, the Afro-Caribbeans, the Afro-Latinos, the continental Africans, we scatter, run away from each other like monkeys. We're busy running away from our primary anchor. In this country, with the exception of the American Indians, everybody has their primary anchor outside the United States. And they're proud of their primary anchor. I attended a fundraising event for the Irish diaspora in this country in Washington. The Irish diaspora were members of Congress. There were people who worked for the State Department. There were people who were employees of the different think tanks. 3, 4 generations removed from Ireland, and yet they were proud Irish diaspora. Why can't we do that as black people? Don't we realize when we don't connect with our anchor, which is Africa, we're like sheep with all sails but no anchor.
Yes.
And you can understand why. And I'm going to address you, men. Why you have stood aside when we are being abused. Why you black men have done nothing. What is being done to Africa, anywhere else, is a reason for all our war. But you black men have sat down and done nothing. You failed to protect us as your wives. You failed to protect us as your mothers, as your sisters, as your daughters, as your children. What is it going to take? How bad do things have to be? If we fall, we can say enough is enough. Israel, a small country, 15 million Jews around the world. Look how powerful that country is. It's because of its diaspora. They stick together like super glue. They have been pulling their financial resources together for decades, if not centuries. Because they realize in their unity lies their strength. There are only 15 million Jews in the world. There are 1.7 billion black people in the world. And yet we're the most disrespected race. We're poor. And that's why we continue to be disrespected. I often say, was there a memo that went out around the world to say, if you are not black and you encounter a black person, feel free to abuse them, feel free to disrespect them? But the question is, have we earned that respect? We have normalized abuse. The example I gave you of the French. How do we allow France to this day to continue to take over $500 billion out of Africa? And nobody's talking about it. The problem is us. The problem is us. We can't see to it that we should not only trust ourselves, but trust each other. I could give my sister $10. She'll come back 6 months later and beat me up because I did not deliver on that $10. But she'll be very happy, gladly give $1,000 to a white brother. And when the white brother loses the $1,000, it's okay. I often use an example of the Laotians. Our communities are full of businesses that are not owned by people who look like us. If one of us has a business in our own community, we'll put them out of business because we'll run to the other business. Why is that? We are a wounded people, and we need healing. And that's the understanding I want us to have. To understand the realities in our lives, the realities on the continent, but more important, the realities about what each and every one of us are going through. Why do we think the way we do? University, I don't think TSU is any different. There are fights between continental professors, African professors, and African American professors. Stupidity of the highest order. I went to Cornell a couple of years ago. The African American students were protesting against the continental Africans and the Caribbean students, accusing the university of using their enrollment to fill the black quota. So I was asked to give a press release. I said, no, I'm not going to give a press release. I need to go talk to the children. So I flew to Cornell, and after my little spiel, I did ask the students, did it occur to you to go to the university and ask for an increased quota for black enrollment? They looked at me like, what are you talking about? I said, if the issue was foreigners, did it occur to you to also protest against the Asian students because their quota is higher than the black quota? They again just looked at me like, what? You see, the mind that is suffering from the legacy of slavery and the legacy of colonization says go after your sister, go after your brother. So the problem starts with us. So while we are working on understanding what's going on in Africa, while we are working on understanding what is going on around us, we must also begin to understand what is going on within yourself. Because you got some answering to do. You got to look at the image in the mirror and ask yourself some hard questions. Who am I? Why do I think the way I do? Why do I behave the way I do? You put two white men and one black man in a room. The two white men stick together like super glue and alienate the black man. Let's turn the table around. You pick two black men and one white man in a room. You see how quickly the two black men will distance from each other and are trying to create an alliance with the white man. You must answer those questions sincerely. That is not the behavior of a race that's going to survive. We're in the process of self-destruction. But right now, I'm here to share with you that if there was ever any time that we must rethink our position, it is now. We are going through what I call a do or die time. 1963, our Pan-African leaders met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to discuss undoing the boundaries that were imposed upon us by the Berlin Conference. Sadly, when they went to Addis Ababa, they were divided. We had the Casablanca group, who were Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. They said Africa for the Africans at home and abroad, and African Union now. There were only 7 of them. The rest were the nationalists. They said, let's go slow. But the reality also that the NATO nations, they had done their part in making sure that the alliance that they wanted to have, the Casablanca group wanted to have, was not going to happen. So it is, we failed to have a united Africa speaking with one voice in 1963. They came up with a compromise which they called the Organization of African Unity. The issue of an Africa speaking with one voice came up at every session. The African heads of states meet twice a year. And year in and year out, they failed to have a consensus until last year in March. They finally arrived at a consensus. They signed an agreement which we are now calling African Continental Free Trade Area. We needed 22 ratifications out of the 55 countries. Ratification is when the heads of states meet in Addis Ababa, they agree on a decision. They have to take this decision back to their countries and put it through parliament. And when approved by the parliament, that is a ratification. And they will deposit the papers with the African Union. So 3 areas that our colonizers, our former colonizers, were thinking this is never going to happen. They didn't think the African heads of states would ever come up and agree on a decision to have one Africa speaking with one voice. March 2018, they finally failed. So they said, okay, we were surprised, we didn't expect them to do this. But ratifications take a long time. In general, 5 years. So they never thought that we would come up with the 22 ratifications. But you know what? When it's time, it is time. Exactly 13 months from when the decision was signed, that's April of this year, the 22nd ratification was deposited with the African Union. July this year, the African heads of states officially launched the African Continental Free Trade Area. July next year, Africa, the sleeping giant who is rising, is going to enter the world stage as one customs union. One Africa. One Africa speaking with one voice. So you see, the boundaries that were imposed upon us back in 1884 are getting ready to melt. As we speak, there are continental teams, regional teams, and national teams that are in the process of cleansing those issues that have kept us from moving around our continent and trading with each other. I'm talking about issues to do with the rules of origin, the non-tariff barriers, the policies, harmonization of the policies. All that is going on now as we speak. Come July, Africa is going to be open. 90% of the goods traded within Africa are going to be traded duty-free. We're talking creation of a combined GDP of $3 trillion, a 1.27 billion workforce, and a marketplace that you can register yourself in one country and spread like wildfire throughout the continent. You see, what has kept the colonizers and the businesses from those countries from running around the continent is because you have to go to this country, register, and then when you finish, then you gotta start all over again in the next country. Guess what? That's all gone. Don't you be quick to clap your hands. So here's the situation. They are ready. They have the funding. They have the expertise. Africa does not have the funding. Africa does not have the expertise. Africa's funding is sitting right here. African expertise is sitting right here. So while you say hallelujah sitting here, they're saying hallelujah taking over your Africa. July next year is going to be a critical point in the history of Africa. For the first time in the history of the continent, we are going to be talking about continental development projects. We are talking about building the Cape to Cairo highway, Senegal to Djibouti highway. We're talking about growing wheat to feed 1.27 billion people, not wheat to feed the Kenyans, not wheat to feed the Nigerians, not wheat to feed the Egyptians. We're talking about what do we need to do to take care of 1.27 billion people. We're talking about massive contracts that are going to be given. The Inga Dam is going to be built on the Congo River. When complete, the Inga Dam is going to power all of Africa and part of Europe. Will you be part of it? If you're a shareholder in Inga Dam, you are building generational wealth. You are set for many generations to come. The question is, are the children of Africa ready to take what is rightfully theirs? Are the children of Africa ready to fill that place that is vacant and is waiting for you? The African heads of states are saying they're sick and tired of some from the West going to Africa poor and coming back rich with what belongs to you. Because you choose to be afraid to go to Africa. The heads of states are saying, you don't go to China and find black people driving the Chinese development agenda. You don't go to Mexico, Europe, India, and find black people driving the development agenda for those regions and those countries. Therefore, you must not, should not, and golly, you will not go to Africa and find non-Africans driving the African continental development agenda, unless if you all choose to vacate that place that has your name. The choice is yours. it would please me royally to see the diaspora come together, pull your funds together, invest in Africa, come back to the US, go back to Europe and play golf while your money is working for you in Africa, just like they do. There's nothing wrong with all of you owning, getting the contract for the oil block, and then you hire Shell. Let Shell work for you while you play golf. There's nothing wrong with you getting the contract. We're not saying we don't want other people to come in. No. They must know that when it comes to Africa, you come behind us. It's just that simple. When it comes to Africa, you come behind the Africans, and that's us. If we can't have control in Africa, where else are black people going to be free? Where else are black people going to be in charge? This is a do or die time, my brothers and sisters. If we do not come together and take our position and protect what is rightfully ours, our continent is going to be gone. And this time, for good. The choice is yours. I am registering an entity called African Diaspora Development Initiative. Level 1 is the creation of a database that we all must belong to. We want to know who you are, where you live, what you do. For when these opportunities are coming up, we want to be able to get to you. Secondly, without money, we are always going to be noisemakers. It's time that we come together and pool our funds into the Diaspora Fund. It's in the process of being created and it should be available end of January. The same is true with the database. We need you to register, be part of the database. In the meantime, a website will be available beginning tomorrow, African Diaspora Development Initiative.org. Feel free to go there and register as well. When the fund is ready, we hope you can also be part of that fund. It is the fund that's going to then invest in the continental projects on the continent. You see, you don't have to go to Africa. Just put yourself in a position to enjoy what is rightfully yours. Be a shareholder. Or if you're a contractor, get a contract to build. And if you're a professional, you can go and work. But we are saying Africa belongs to the Africans at home and abroad. The black cleaning lady in Brazil must benefit. She must be a shareholder. The taxi driver in New York City, Beyonce. No one should be left behind unless you wish to be left behind. African Diaspora Development Initiative.org, beginning tomorrow. Institute, thank you. African Diaspora Development Institute.org, beginning tomorrow. I'm hoping that each and every one of you can do some serious soul searching. We're not asking anybody to donate anything. We're saying invest in not only your future, but the future of your children, your grandchildren, and generations to come. But also understand that you are an African regardless of where you were born, and that Africa is home, and that the healing that we desire starts with you acknowledging that you are a proud, beautiful, intelligent, sophisticated, highly adaptable, and totally indestructible African. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador. You're such an inspiration to all of us. Thank you so much.